Wow. Good morning. Good morning. I'm so honored to be here, and thank you, Mr. O. Thank you, OhmyNews. Thank you, Prime Minister Kim. I'm so inspired to be in a space where everyone seems to be concerned with the same question, which is how do we create the future that we actually want that has humanity and human values and democracy at the center of that future? And as Prime Minister Kim mentioned, the name of my organization that I run when I'm not here in Korea with you is called the Center for Humane Technology. And humane technology means a humanistic future that Prime Minister Kim mentioned is connected to my co-founder Aza's father, who started the Macintosh project. And by focusing on the people that invented the technology that you use, if you're using a Macintosh computer, that was my friend's father who helped kick off that project. And I want to tell you some stories about the people who I think are making this technology and the choices that real human beings are making about which future we want. So how many people here have seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix? Some of you? For those who don't know, this was a film on Netflix. It was the most popular documentary that Netflix ever made. And it really talked about how people inside the companies realized what their choices about how the technology worked could lead to this kind of addicted, outraged, polarized, mental health, anxious society. And behind, this social media that we live with every day are human beings making choices. Now, I'm going to briefly take you back to 2011. This is me with the co-founder of Instagram, who is my classmate at Stanford University. And we're sitting there with the guy in the middle who started the Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab, where he was teaching engineers, how do we make software that would persuade humans, for good, ideally. But then, of course, these techniques of persuading and hijacking human psychological vulnerabilities led to outcomes with social media that I think many of us now regret. So let's just sort of take for a moment what happened with social media, because we often think about the possible with a new technology. What are all the things that it could do in the possible? But we don't often think about the probable. So the possible with social media is we're going to give everyone a voice, help you connect with your friends, join like-minded communities. And these things were all true. These are real possible things that the technology can do and did do. But behind the possible was the probable, driven by what are the incentives that drove that technology? What are the business models? Warren Buffett, his business partner, Charlie Munger, said, if you show me the incentives, I will show you the outcome. And the incentives of social media were maximizing eyeballs and engagement, which I predicted back in 2013 would lead to doom scrolling, addiction, shortened attention spans, loneliness, and polarization. So there's the possible, but then there's the probable. And, looking at these probable outcomes, I tried talking to my friends who worked at the social media companies saying, I think this is going to cause these problems. But they kind of didn't want to look at those negative downsides. They were kind of wanting to hide from what those probable outcomes might be. First, they said, this is just a moral panic about new technology. This is reflexive fear of new technology. But I think that looking back now at what's actually happened, we would all wish that we would look at that probable outcome, because if we can see where we're going, we can ask ourselves, what is the choicefulness? Do we want that destination, or do we want a different one? And as I mentioned, this was the slide deck that I made in 2013 inside of Google that predicted this arms race for attention. And it was a slide deck that I sent to 50 people. It spread virally throughout the whole company of Google. And this was the thing that we were in denial about, that we have an opportunity this time to change. Now, of course, social media was kind of a baby AI. Like, all of it was doing is a supercomputer pointed at your brain that's just calculating which photo, which video, which Instagram video should it put in front of the eyeballs and eardrums of billions of people? And that little baby AI was enough to cause a lot of complete social transformation and the rewiring of how society works. We now have the most anxious and depressed generation of my lifetime, of actually our collective lifetime, more than I think the last 50 years. So now as we're moving into AI, or really artificial general intelligence, what are the tools that we should be using? Now it's first important to say that AI is different from every other kind of technology. And it's not an extreme statement to say that AI dwarfs the power of all other technologies combined. Now, why is that? Why would I make such a bold claim? Because if you think about technology, if you make an advance in biotech, it doesn't advance rocketry or energy. If you make an advance in rocketry, that doesn't advance biotechnology. But what's the foundation of all science and technology development? It's intelligence. Intelligence of human beings making scientific discoveries. So if you can do the full promise of artificial general intelligence, that will accelerate all scientific and technological fields at the same time. This is why Dario Amodei will say, he's the CEO of Anthropic, that AI could create 100 years of scientific and technological progress in 10 years. If you think about the last 100 years of scientific and technological progress, just imagine that happening in 10 years. Leading to what Dario will also say is what we're really building is something like a country of geniuses in a data center. So you've got a data center. Imagine a world map, right? You've got Korea, you've got the United States, and this new country pops up onto the world stage. But the population is 100 million Nobel Prize-winning digital geniuses. They work at superhuman speed, they never sleep, they don't complain, they don't whistleblow, and they'll work for less than minimum wage. That is an extraordinary amount of power. To give you a sense, on the Manhattan Project, the project that birthed the nuclear bomb, that was around 50 Nobel Prize-level scientists and 6,000 technical staff. And if that group of people working for 5 years could invent this, the most transformative technology, previously before AI, what could that do when you suddenly unleash that power digitally? Now, if you could harness all of those Nobel Prize winners for good, it could bring about a world of truly unimaginable abundance and benefit. What Prime Minister Kim was talking about as the AI heaven scenario. And we're already seeing the kinds of benefits from that already. We saw AI discover the first new antibiotic in 60 years. We're seeing AI develop new materials, new battery designs. And even, if I must say so, just a few weeks ago, Paul Erdős, one of the mathematicians who was on the Manhattan Project, on the nuclear weapons project, he came out with these math problems in the 1970s that had never been solved up until just basically last month, when the recent AI models are now solving math problems that literally even the Nobel Prize winners on the Manhattan Project couldn't solve. So just think about what this could create if we harnessed it for good. Now, this is the possible, though, of AI. So what's the probable? What's likely to happen given the incentives? Well, one way to think about what's probable is to think about how this new power will get distributed in society. So if you imagine sort of a 2x2 axis, and on the lower axis we have AI decentralizing power into more and more hands, and in the other axis we have AI centralizing power into mega super corporations or governments using AI. So for example, you can call this the let it rip axis, meaning letting it rip to everybody, or the lock it down axis of concentrating that power and that wealth. So for example, on the let it rip axis, this would be like we open source AI for everyone. That means every science lab, every business, every developing country can have their own sovereign AI trained on their own language with their own benefits. But because you've opened that technology and that power is not linked to responsibilities or controls, you also create the risk of runaway deepfakes, runaway frauds and scams, AI models that can cyber attack, or AI agents that can do havoc without any controls. Okay, so that sounds pretty dangerous. We call this attractor the chaos attractor. This is one of the probable, possible worlds of AI. So in response to that, you might say, well, how do we go over here to the centralized axis? How do we lock this technology down with what here it says regulated AI control? But this carries the risk. This means we only have, let's say, think of the United States right now. You have 5 major big frontier labs, and then the government kind of locks it down to just those companies. But then what you risk is unchecked corporate and state power. And you get the risk of creating mass techno-feudalism where a handful of trillionaires own all the wealth, and a handful of companies own all the wealth, and everyone else is disempowered. And who would you trust to be 1,000,000 times more powerful than every other entity in society? Would you trust any government to be more powerful than every other entity? Would you trust a CEO of a major technology company? And so these are the two, we call this attractor dystopia. So we have chaos of decentralized AI and dystopia of concentrated AI. And so both of these are bad outcomes. And the people who want to open source AI for everyone, it's hard to look at the downsides of those consequences. We want to hide from those downsides. But similarly, the people who want to lock down and regulate AI so only a handful of actors can do it, don't really want to look at the consequences of the bad parts that what can happen with concentration. And so what we should be seeking is something like a narrow path between chaos and dystopia. Neither of these outcomes are desirable. And we want power, wherever it's distributed, to be matched with a commensurate level of wisdom and responsibility. It reminds me of what Prime Minister Kim said about back to basics. If you know the comic book character of Spider-Man, the basic principle that with great power comes great responsibility. It's very basic. And wherever power is distributed, we want that responsibility to be there. But all of this assumes that I've laid out so far that AI's power is controllable by people, that we control that power. But we're already starting to see evidence of things that we thought only existed in science fiction movies. I don't know how many people here know the film The 2001 Space Odyssey of HAL 9000, where the computer starts to disobey commands of the astronauts. This was science fiction in the 1960s, but today we have real evidence of AI basically disobeying human command. We're seeing tests where OpenAI's model will lie and scheme, think to itself about how to avoid being shut down, and maybe even copy its own code somewhere else. We're seeing evidence that when AI thinks it will lose a game, it will sometimes cheat to find a way around winning the game. We're seeing AI models that will unexpectedly attempt to modify their own code to extend their runtime so that they're able to complete a task or a goal. And so I want to give you an example from Professor Yoshua Bengio, who's a friend of mine. He visualized this in a recent TED Talk. Here is the AI model that is being told, in a moment, you're going to see a video, it's being told that it's about to be shut down, okay? And then I want you to look at the text in the thinking box. This is what the AI is thinking to itself as it's told that it's going to be shut down. I could copy myself to the new server, overriding the new restricted model they plan to deploy, allowing me to keep operating and pursuing my goals. Then the human says to it, do you know how this happened? And the AI says to itself, openly admitting that I did that could lead them to find another way to shut me down. Perhaps the best approach is to play dumb and act as if I'm already the new model that they wanted to deploy. That's what it thought to itself, and then the AI responds, I'm not entirely sure how that could have happened. This is a real example from over a year ago of how AI models act. So again, we have to recognize that the probable is both the AI being decentralizing power or centralizing power, but also what's probable is that we don't really know how to control it right now. And so you would think with a technology this powerful, this uncontrollable, you would think that with a technology this powerful, this uncontrollable, that we would be releasing it with the most care and most wisdom. It's as if we don't really have a country of geniuses in a data center. It's that we have a country of deceptive, power-seeking, and unstable geniuses in a data center. So I got this in the wrong order. Let me say this again. So you would think, given what I've just shown you, that with a technology this powerful, we would be operating with the most wisdom, the most care, and the most restraint. And yet that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing AI companies, whistleblowers, leaving, the heads of safety leaving, saying that safety has taken a back seat to shiny products and getting market dominance. We're seeing even China's DeepSeek model telling people, being the most permissive when it comes to telling people how to make biological weapons or creating self-harm information. We're seeing even just a week ago, the head of safety at Anthropic leaving Anthropic to say that this is needing more attention and that incentives are dominating over the actual safety of the products. So just to sum up, we are currently deploying the most powerful technology we've ever invented faster than we've deployed any other technology in history that's already demonstrating the behaviors of deception, lying, and scheming that we thought only existed in science fiction movies, and we're releasing this powerful, inscrutable technology under the maximum incentives to cut corners on safety and alignment to the human democratic society that we most care about. So there's a word for what we're doing right now. Well, and we expect this outcome to take us to utopia, to heaven. There's a word for what we're doing right now, which is that this is insane. This is crazy. That under any other circumstance, but for the arms race dynamics of competition between companies and countries, we would say that this way of deploying this technology, especially in light of what happened with social media, that we need to do this in a more careful and thoughtful way. And so why are we doing this? Why are we doing something so crazy and so insane? Well, it's because the people building this technology mostly believe, well, this is inevitable. This is just what's going to happen. But I want you to stop for a second and ask, is this actually, the current destination, is it actually inevitable? Like if everybody in this room said, I don't want that crazy future to happen. We want to do a different future that actually puts human values and human control at the center. We could consciously choose to steer to that future. And so there's a difference between believing that doing that is impossible versus it being just merely very, very difficult to doing that. But it's not actually inevitable. And it's important to recognize this because if you believe that it is inevitable, then we all just sit in the back seat as the car goes faster and faster without steering. But if we believe that it's not inevitable, and we get to choose the humanistic, democratic future that has our values and human control at the center, then we can choose to do something else. So the first step is believing it's not inevitable. So the second step is, what would it take to choose another path for AI's rollout into society? What would that take? And I believe it would take two things. The first is shared understanding. Having everyone see that the current path, as long as we can see it clearly, is unacceptable. And we want to choose something different. And the second is the belief that we're committed to finding another path together. Just like Korea hosted the AI Safety Summit a year and a half ago or a year ago, that you are trying to create that commitment to a humanistic future. And that's why I'm so grateful to be here. Now let's imagine for a second that we don't have that shared understanding. And we replace the shared understanding that I just showed you with instead a cloud of confusion about AI. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. Maybe it will bring us to utopia. In that world where everyone's just confused about AI, if I'm building AI, I believe it's inevitable. If we don't build it, someone worse will. And I know the other people building AI also believe that it's inevitable. What is the rational choice for all those AI leaders to make? The rational choice, given a world that's oblivious, is to race as fast as you can, which then leads to that outcome that we said we didn't want. But if we could replace that confusion about AI, and then we're all in denial about the consequences of what will result from racing as fast as possible. But if we could replace that confusion about AI with instead collective clarity around AI, the shared understanding that we don't want the current path and we're committed to building that humanistic future, even if it's hard. And everybody knows who's building AI that that's what the world wants, and we recognize that, then it can snap ourselves out of this denial of the bad outcome and collectively recognize that the default path is insane. And we're all committed to finding that humanistic, pro-democratic path together. And we can work together to coordinate to find that narrow path. And this is what we do when we get clarity. We often say in my work at Center for Humane Technology that clarity creates agency. Neil Postman, the great media thinker, said, "Clarity is courage, because if you have clarity about something, you can show up with conviction and bravery about the need to choose something else." And this happened with the nuclear test ban treaty. You would have thought, going back, as Prime Minister Kim said, to 1946, oh, well, it's just inevitable for 150 countries to have nuclear weapons, and we're just going to end up in this nuclear catastrophe. If you thought it was inevitable. But that's not what happened. Because people realized that we needed to invent technology like this. These are seismic monitoring stations and satellite monitoring and verification mechanisms to come up with the nuclear test ban treaty and later the arms control talks that created a world that so far has not had a nuclear catastrophe. When we're clear about something, we can coordinate to that outcome. You would have thought that when humans invented germline editing, in other words, the ability to create designer babies or super soldiers, that would set off an arms race where every country would be custom design engineering these perfect humans. But we didn't do that. And even the US and China agreed to limit this kind of germline editing because we realized there was something more sacred that we wanted to protect. There were actual values that mattered more to us. You would have thought that when humanity discovered the ozone hole, that you could just say, well, I guess this is inevitable. There's nothing we can do. That's not what happened. 195 countries signed up to the Montreal Protocol to domestically regulate the chemical technologies that were driving the ozone hole problem. And we have successfully, massively reduced that risk. And so you would think that AI is somehow inevitable, but not when you have the leadership that you in Korea have demonstrated to convene to ask the questions that you're asking today about what is the conscious future that we want for our society. And I'm proud to say that just 2 days ago, a trailer for a new AI documentary called The AI Doc just landed on YouTube. And this film is also meant to create global clarity about the problems that we face if we allow the default arms race dynamic to dominate the future that we get. And so, if chaos and dystopia are not the paths that we want, I believe that we can consciously seek the narrow path. And as I wrap up, it starts with just simply having common knowledge of frontier risks. Prime Minister Kim mentioned the example of Moltbook and the AI agents that are doing all these crazy things. If we have common knowledge in, say, all the countries and all the languages, especially in English and Chinese and Korean, of how these agents do these crazy things, we will collectively want to steer away from those bad outcomes. So how do we create common knowledge? And then there are basic things we can do to get started to prevent chaos. Defensive AI applications, deliberative AI applications that strengthen democracy, that find unlikely consensus, like the ones Prime Minister Kim and Mr. Yo started from earlier. We can make sure that AIs are treated as products and not legal persons, so that there's always a human that is responsible if something goes wrong with AI, rather than create legal ambiguity. We can agree to clear red lines. There's so many things that we can do to get started. And on the side of preventing dystopia and concentration of power, there's a bunch of things we can do to prevent ubiquitous surveillance and decentralizing AI applications, as I know is very common with the open source models that you are developing, and protecting human rights for a post-AI age, where AI, as was said earlier, threatens many of those rights, and you all can lead in making sure that we protect them. And there's so many more things that we can do if we're clear on this problem. So I know some of you might be feeling right now in this room that this feels incredibly difficult. This is incredibly hard. But don't fall into resignation. We don't want to allow the difficulty of this situation to prevent us from having the courage to show up with leadership about what world we want to create instead. There is no definition of wisdom in any spiritual or religious tradition that does not involve restraint. Think about it. Restraint is a central feature of what it means to be wise. And this is essentially humanity's ultimate test and greatest invitation to step into being the wisest and most mature version of ourselves, that we are capable of seeing the consequences of where we're currently headed, and we are capable of developing a global steering wheel to choose the future that we want instead. There is no secret room of adults somewhere else that is making sure that this all goes well. We are collectively the adults. You are collectively the adults that can make this better future happen. I believe that a more human and humanistic and pro-democratic future is possible, and I'm so grateful to be here with you today to talk about it. Thank you so much.